Thank you. Welcome, everyone. It's nice to see the sun shining today. And I would agree with all of you that we're pretty blessed today to be able to sit here in the good old United States of America with the freedoms that we have to enjoy. Thank you for coming, and thank you to all who have served our country and the families and friends that have supported them. I'm going to read the names of the Hicksville World War I veterans, and I know there are some family members here from some of those veterans, and if you would stand up or raise your hand when I call their name, it would be nice to acknowledge that you're here. Edgar Gray Swingle, George D. Jackson, Glenn Crow, Earl Leroy Myers, Edward C. Smart, Foster Mark Linton, Ralph Emerson Mabry, Tracy J. Clark, Stephen Douglas McKinley, Ellis Dahl, Donald Glenn Cottrell, George Washington Tustison, Lewis Newman, Lee Sanders. These are the soldiers that we knew about, that we know about. There may be others. Sometimes there's a little confusion. They may live in Indiana with the Hicksville address or such things as that. But we want to honor all of our Hicksville World War I veterans. Hopefully we had a good list for that. Thank you so much. And for those relatives who made the trip here to come and celebrate with us. So we will go on now. We will, let's lay my fingers down. We will have the Reverend Steve Byers here.
It's an honor for me to open us up in prayer. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for this day. We thank you that you are the Creator God. And Lord, we'd like to thank you for the men and the women that have sacrificed their lives to give us the freedom that we have here today. Lord, I'd like to thank you for the families that are still recovering. Lord, pain is always there, but it continues to heal. But Lord, we thank you for those families that have sacrificed also. We thank you for the men and women that are in the services right now. And Lord, I pray that you give them protection, perseverance. Lord, I pray that they know that you are an almighty God, that you care for them, and that you thank them. Lord, I thank you for this opportunity that we can come and show some honor and respect for the men and women that help provide the freedom that you so graciously give. I pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.
Thank you all for coming. To save on time, I've already posted colors at this time. Boy Scouts, please come forward.
Color guard, prepare to hoist the colors. States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You may be seated. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce to you our speaker for today. Is Mitch Yockelson. He's the Chief Historian for the United States World War I Centennial Commission. He is also an investigative archivist with the National Archives and Records Administration Archival Recovery Program. Mitch has authored articles and book reviews in various journals and magazines, and he's written 4 books. His most recent, 47 Days, How Persian Warriors Came of Age to Defeat the German Army in World War I, was published by the New American Library Press in 2016. Mitch received a bachelor's degree from Frostburg State University, a master's degree from George Mason University, and holds a PhD from the Royal Military College of Science, Cranfield University, United Kingdom. And we are really honored to have Mitch here today, and he is partially responsible for us having this nice celebration today, particularly recognizing Muse Argonne and our Hicksville veterans from World War I, because he contacted me probably over a year ago, and he said, hey, do you know that you might be the only place in the United States that has a street named Muse Argonne? And I said, no. He goes, you're going to celebrate it, aren't you? I was like, yeah, if you come to help. So he agreed to that, and I'm pretty happy to have him here today. Please welcome Mitch Yockelson.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Mayor Collins, for encouraging me to come out. Everything she said is absolutely true. In studying what ultimately became the largest battle in American history, it involved 1.2 million Americans who fought over a 60-mile front between the Meuse River and the Argonne Forest in northern France. It was a battle that lasted 47 days. And it didn't end till 100 years ago. And it's no coincidence that the armistice and the end of the Meuse-Argonne battle coincided, because it's those Americans, those 1.2 brave American soldiers that we affectionately called doughboys, that wore a uniform very much like this gentleman is wearing here to my right, fought in a foreign land. Think about, today we travel it's commonplace to get on a jet and to fly overseas or fly throughout the continental United States. The vast majority of these soldiers, including the thousands of men from the state of Ohio who were in the 37th Division, went to a foreign land, fought against an enemy that truthfully they had no beef against, but they fought bravely. And as Diane read, many of those men didn't come back. Some of them were buried overseas in cemeteries. Some of them are over here in national cemeteries. The battle itself is the chief reason, I believe, that the German army decided it was time for an armistice. It was time to end the fighting that had been taking place over 40 years. Those soldiers drove the German army to their knees. The battle commenced on September 26, 1918, early in the morning when more than 3,000 guns of several different calibers, artillery pieces, fired against the German positions. They were all guns that were manufactured by the French, but manned by American soldiers, including a captain from Missouri by the name of Harry S. Truman, who would, of course, later on go on to be a U.S. Senator and then President of the United States. Once the fire had stopped, about 5:30 in the morning, those brave soldiers jumped forward. They went towards the German lines, caught the Germans by surprise that first day, met most of their objectives, and into the second day. And then things fell apart. The weather was cold, it was rainy, and it was a very difficult ground to fight against. The Germans were heavily entrenched throughout the Meuse-Argonne front. And once they figured out that the Americans were launching an offensive that was part of a larger attack across the so-called Western Front, the main theater of operations in Europe, the Germans started bringing in replacements. They got tough, and they halted the American advance. Things started to fall apart badly into late September and into early October. But the Americans were led ably by General John J. Pershing, who was now 58 years old at the time. He was wearing two hats. He was commanding the overall American forces, known as the American Expeditionary Forces, but also the tactical army that was attacking the American First Army. And Pershing would not give up. He would go to the front. He would push his men off. He recognized the difficulties they faced, the rough terrain, climbing up hills and slippery ground. They also fought in a very thick, deep forest, the Argonne Forest. The Germans had been on this ground for 4 years, expected an attack at some point, didn't know exactly when, and so they had it heavily fortified with machine guns spread all across. American tactics, as General Pershing preached, he wanted the men out of the trenches. He wanted them moving forward. And you think about the Civil War battles of 1861-65, these were no different. But these brave men went forward against machine guns. Many of them didn't make it more than a few feet, but others figured out how to fight. And as the battle went on into mid-October, there were changes in command. Pershing was a ruthless but a confident leader. He sacked some of his commanders, brought others into the line, and the Americans continued to get perseverance and continue to fight. More reinforcements came in, and by the end of October into the beginning of November, there were more than 1 million troops fighting in this area. A final attack occurred where the Americans surrounded the German machine gunners, the German troops, and this is when they said, enough is enough. The Germans realized that the Americans were here as an allied partner, as an allied coalition to fight, and that had the war continued perhaps into the following year of 1919, it would be primarily the Americans who fought. And it wasn't just the American soldiers who were doing their part over there. There were thousands of young women who could have stayed home, could have stayed with their families, but volunteered as American Red Cross nurses, worked in the field hospitals, the base hospitals, saw horrific things, saw young men who had been maimed, had limbs missing, were coughing from gas warfare, but stayed there to treat them. We use the term today 24/7. That's how long these women worked in the hospitals. They also had to deal with the horrible influenza epidemic. It's known as the Spanish flu. Had nothing to do with Spain. Most likely the flu had been had been taken from the United States over to France, and these nurses had to deal with these young men who were dying of pneumonia. Besides the nurses, one of the true saviors of the American Expeditionary Forces were the so-called Hello Girls. These were telephone operators from all out around the United States who were recruited by the U.S. Army Signal Corps. They had worked for telephone companies. Their job was to have some background in speaking French, to come overseas and work in telephone huts that were close to the front. They were relaying the messages, getting the word out from General Pershing and his staff to the troops at the front, telling them when to attack, when the Germans were recognizing their lines. They wore uniforms. Thankfully, none of them were wounded or maimed during the war. But General Pershing said afterwards that they were as valuable to his efforts as the soldiers themselves who carried their Springfield model 1903s and 1917s. In November of 1918, as what would turn out to be the war came to an end, the American troops, including the 37th Division, which was now on the Belgian front. The Belgians were having a tough time. They were attacking at the same time as the Meuse-Argonne. And their commander contacted General Pershing and said, "We need help. Can you send some Americans?" He didn't have to look far, and he looked over towards the Ohioans and said, "We need you." So many of those troops moved over to the Belgian front, and some of the soldiers that Mayor Collins mentioned who died during the war actually died on the Belgian front as well. By the first week of November, the Germans were giving up. The negotiations were going on behind the scenes, and eventually on November 10th, a meeting was convened in a small rail car in a little village of Compiègne, right in a wooded area, where the Germans were forced to recognize that the war was over and take the brunt of the fighting. It was announced that an armistice would take effect on November 11, 1918, the following day. Now keep in mind that an armistice is not a surrender. It's basically a lull in the fighting. So the overall commander of the Allied forces, a Frenchman, Marshal Ferdinand Foch, told General Pershing and the other commanders under his charge, "You will continue fighting. We want to keep attacking right up until 11 a.m. His fear was that maybe the Germans would renege on the promise. Perhaps they would continue fighting. So there were men in line fighting up until 11 a.m. Sadly, a large number of American troops were badly wounded and many were killed. Some of the fighting took place even after 11. Most of the troops at the front didn't know there was an armistice. They had heard there were going to be rumors. But finally, when word came to them that the fighting was over, the cheering started. And then they started looking back on what was the impact of this battle, what was the impact of the war. Well, over the course of those 47 days of fighting on that 60-mile front in the Meuse-Argonne, almost 27,000 American soldiers lost their lives. Many of them are lying in perpetuity in the Meuse-Argonne cemetery, which is near the village of Romane, where some of the more serious fighting took place. It's part of the American Battle Monuments Commission. And in that cemetery lie many of those soldiers who were well taken care of. The remainder of them, at government expense, were brought back to the United States and were buried in private cemeteries or veteran cemeteries throughout the U.S. The Meuse-Argonne, of course, was only one of the main battles that the Americans fought in, but certainly the largest. Americans also gave their lives on the Marne at the Battle of Belleau Wood, Chateau Thierry, and the battle that preceded Meuse-Argonne, Saint-Mihiel. By the time that the war did come to an end at 11 a.m. on November 11th, more than 50,000 American soldiers had been killed in the fighting. Another 50,000 had lost their lives due to the influenza and other causes. Today, it's an honor to be here in Hicksville, as Mayor Collins said, because I recognize that the Meuse-Argonne must have meant a great deal to the people of Hicksville. So in 1921, they took the time to place a marker just a few blocks from here where my wife and I had the chance to see. And it's a very moving time today. Of course, we want to recognize all of the veterans who served our country bravely since we rebelled against the British back in the 70s. But today is a special day, being the 100th anniversary. World War I comes to an end, and I appreciate that so many people have come out here to honor this, and I appreciate Hicksville for inviting me to come here and to speak and to be part of this very moving tribute. Thank you.
And I would highly recommend his book, 47 Days, because as soon as he contacted me, I went to the library and got the book, and I really enjoyed it, and it really, I guess, intrigued me to learn more about World War I also. So, it's very good. Eric, I don't think you need introductions, but...
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm the commander of the American Legion Post here in Hicksville. I'm here to talk to you about our 100th anniversary. All our men, once the fighting was over, they were waiting to come back home. And their morale was down low. Some of the officers got together and got to talking, and in March of 1919, they come up with the idea of starting the American Legion. So our veterans could get together and talk to one another about what they had went through and to help those ones that were, all those veterans that were struggling. We gather at events like this to honor not just recent generations of veterans, but every man and woman who has honorably served since the American Revolution. Even with that impressive victory, Veterans Day 2018 is especially significant. It was 100 years ago at 11 a.m. on 11/11, that's November 11, 1918, when armistice began, which ended World War I. It was a conflict so bloody and horrific that many optimistically referred to it as a war to end all wars. Sadly, it wasn't. It was that war which led to the founding of our organization, the American Legion, and a commitment by this country to care for veterans who came home blinded by mustard gas, shell-shocked from trench warfare, or impoverished due to their military service. It is a commitment that continues today, whether the wounds be inflicted by an IED in Afghanistan or injuries from a training accident in California. It is a commitment that covers veterans of all races, religions, genders, and economic classes. While we currently have a strong economy, veterans still have a higher chance of homelessness than those who have not served in uniform. Too often, veterans' highly skilled service isn't fully appreciated in the civilian sector, where certifications and college degrees sometimes outweigh common sense. The best way to eliminate veterans' homelessness is to reduce veterans' unemployment and to provide treatment to those who may try self-medication as a means to deal with their post-traumatic stress disorder. That's where the American Legion comes in. If you're not a member, please come see us at Post 223 and we'll get you signed up. It's only $30 a year, and this magazine alone is worth that $30. It keeps you informed of everything the American Legion and our government and the VA is doing for you. And we had a raffle for a quilt that was donated at last Veterans Day. And I'm going to use that money to pay for the first 11 veterans that stepped forward and joined that have not previously been American Legion member. I met a young lady yesterday. She's the daughter of a Vietnam vet here in town. And she's the first one to join, so our post 9/11 veterans, I implore you, step forward and join our Legion. Because right now, most of our membership Vietnam era or older. So that's more than 60 to 65% of our Legion posts is over 60 years old. And one of our duties is to perform honor guard ceremonies for events like this and every time a veteran passes away. We have one coming up next Saturday. A Vietnam vet has succumbed to his battle with Agent Orange. So I implore you, veterans, step forward, join the American Legion, and make us strong here in Hicksville once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Next, I will introduce to you Tanya Bruner with the Defiance County Veterans Affairs Office. Thank you, Tanya, for coming today.
This is a delight for me to be here and honored, but I would suggest that anytime Hicksville does any more dedication, it be in June. I'll tell you, folks, the committee that worked on this was Hicksville veterans. You, the people of this village, you built this memorial. This is also another addition to a beautiful memorial. And the committee not only wanted to commemorate the tragic events of World War I and what this village gave to that war, but they also prepared a memorial that can be used for the 100th anniversaries of the next 3 wars. So you'll see that there are 4 wars on this memorial that's behind me. It was designed and built by Mark Holmeyer of Holmeyer Monumentals, and it was built so that it would not destroy the sight line. The sight line is when you come towards this memorial, when we're not all gathered here, you see the fracture of the 2 pieces of granite, the eagle of freedom rising, and behind it, clearly visible, the battlefield cross. That's the helmet and the rifle. That's the personal cost of war. We're going to now dedicate that, and what more appropriate than to have a World War I doughboy do that dedication with us as we lay the first wreath. And afterwards we will have the playing of taps. Mark Heilman is representing in authentic doughboy uniform. And as I sat here cold and shivering, I looked at what they were wearing in the trenches. It's amazing the courage they had. Those boys from Hicksville, they walked the streets of this village, and then they walked into the pages of history. We will now dedicate the memorial. Rise as you are able. I would like to introduce to you, and I don't think he really takes an introduction, Representative Craig Riedel.
Good afternoon, everyone. What a great day. What a wonderful, wonderful day. I want to thank Mayor Collins for organizing this today. What a great idea. And Speaker Mitch Yockelson for making the trip here today. Just an incredible amount of history. And we're so blessed. come from a military family. My father was in the Army for 6 years. So I hold our military and all law enforcement in the highest esteem. The highest esteem. I have something here I'd like to read from the Ohio General Assembly in honor of today's event that I'm going to give to Mayor Collins when we're finished here. On behalf of the members of the House of Representatives of the 132nd General Assembly of Ohio, we are pleased to extend special recognition to the village of Hicksville on the occasion of its World War I Centennial Commemoration, November 11, 2018. The Meuse-Argonne campaign was the final Allied offensive and largest operation undertaken by American expeditionary forces during World War I. And the centennial of this operation is an appropriate time to pay tribute to those individuals who have answered this nation's call to arms and who have made sacrifices in service to the United States of America. Ohio's veterans effectively combined courage with tremendous strength during their loyal service in our country's armed forces. In numerous areas of endeavor, they have distinguished themselves as patriotic and hardworking Ohioans who are truly deserving of high praise. The heroic traditions of our country's armed forces are an important part of our American heritage. By giving willingly of their time, energy, and abilities to protect our nation, Ohio's veterans have earned the respect and admiration of all those with whom they have served and the gratitude of Americans everywhere. Thus, with sincere pleasure, we commend the village of Hicksville on this World War I Centennial Commemoration and encourage local citizens to participate in this noteworthy observance. I was reminded again earlier today that, we don't always see eye to eye as Americans. We don't always see eye to eye. And that's okay. That's okay. But we are so fortunate. We live in a country where we can have those conversations and still end the day as being Americans. And that's a freedom that is very unique to the United States. The one thing is for sure, even if we don't see eye to eye, the one thing I think we all can agree on is we love our veterans. We love our veterans. Whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or green or white, doesn't matter. We love our veterans. And we are so thankful, so incredibly thank you for your service. So it's an honor to be here today. Again, Mayor Collins, thank you so much for putting this together. God bless Hicksville. God bless the great state of Ohio. And God bless the USA.
Thank you everyone for coming. I know it's cold outside, but you know what? Our guys fought in the cold, and we figured we could all sit here in the cold too to honor them and all of our veterans. And there are so many people that helped me with this, and I appreciate it so much. I appreciate Mitch and his wife traveling this far, and Mark and his wife coming to the library yesterday and having a display and taking part in the ceremony today. And I just can't name them all, but there were a lot of people that helped me out on this. And I had a grandfather in World War I. His name was Leonard W. Guilford, and he would have loved hearing the band because he was a runner and a bugler in World War I, and then he played his clarinet in the World War I band after the war. And he would always get his clarinet out and have me bring my saxophone to his house, and we would play together. So I know the music would have been part of one of the most enjoyable things for him today. Thank you very much for coming.
You're all invited to St. Michael for cookies, and we have plenty of coffee to help warm you up. And Mitch will be there for 2 hours for question and answer. Thank you.
I would highly encourage you to come. St. Michael's is just a couple blocks that direction.